You're just going to keep your video off, so I got to guess what your face looks like, and so this is going to be...
Is my video not...
How do you... You're a doctor, Nick. How do you not know that? There you are. Hi, Nick.
Hey, there I am.
Oh, wow, your sound is so good this time. Yay.
I got the microphone thing.
Wow, so you're crushing it.
I'm pretty certain this is something I can do.
Well, we'll see. We'll see if you earn that degree and those letters after your name. We'll see. I should say degrees, plural. Oh, hi, you're listening to Service from Hell, a podcast featuring people that are currently in customer service positions or the lucky few that got out and all of the good, bad, and infinitely irritating things that go along with that work. I'm actor and writer Kate Gaffney, and I'm uniquely qualified to discuss this as I used to work at a very busy and very popular comedy club in Los Angeles. And at least one of you listening right now has probably grabbed me and told me you were ready to order when I was running around like a crazy person. So let's eat. Joining us via Zoom for the second time on the podcast while he is on call for the hospital, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Nicholas J. Mayer. Nick is a nephrologist working on the front lines of the COVID battle, but he didn't start out that way. His full bio can be heard on his other episode called Dr. Nicholas J. Mayer as a Doctor Because of TV. He really likes it when I emphasize the doctor stuff. It doesn't make him uncomfortable at all. So go listen to that episode if you haven't yet. He really is a doctor, and y'all asked about his episode a ton. We got a lot of feedback. Thanks, everybody. In fact, they thought you were funny, Nick, so let that sink in, which I found to be completely untrue, but what are you going to do? So you all asked for him a lot, so he's here to answer your questions. We're going to break from the normal formats, and, like I said, his full episode where he answers all the questions in the way that we normally do it, you can already hear. It aired several months ago. But hopefully this can make people feel hopeful, fingers crossed, and learn how one of the questions we got is how people can safely have sex during quarantine. So, Dr. Mayer, are you ready? We have a lot for you. Do you want to add anything to the stuff I already said, or do you want to dive right in?
No, I want us to try to work the word doctor in as frequently as possible.
I'm doing it just to piss you off. Okay, good. Okay, so from your last episode, so we're going to do this in two parts. From your last episode, there were people that had questions specific to some stories that you told on that episode. And then we're going to dive into some COVID questions that people had. So just based off of your last episode, and as I said, audience, if you haven't listened, go listen, because this won't make a ton of sense to you. But a few people actually asked how, and this is like, we're going hard early, how you could tell that the customer at the spaghetti factory was choking when it seemed like no one else could tell that, because people seem concerned that they're going to miss the signs of choking. Particularly a couple parents asked about this. So if you're open to diving into how you could tell that elderly person at the table was choking.
Yeah. It's usually this is in all the textbooks, the person trying to push a glass of water down the throat of the chokee sign, where there's always someone standing right next to the person. In this case, it was the son trying to feed the mom who's choking a glass of water, and you'll see that happen. Like, I've seen a few people choke at restaurants. There's always someone standing there trying to push water into them. Which is not the right thing to do. You don't want to do that. With this, it's like, do you ever have that moment where you see something that you've seen a million times, but it catches you off guard because you're in a different situation? You're just not in that situation,
Yeah.
I think that is how this kind of thing goes. Most people just aren't ready for it. But yeah, someone's in distress, and you start to think about why they in distress and not talking to you, and might turn. I'm a little colorblind, so the colors don't matter to me so much. But they usually turn a little bit of a purplish color, and then that's when you kind of go, "Oh, you're eating a meal; they must be choking." And it's usually the people who are more susceptible to that. I've seen patients we have these patients in the hospital who are just incapable of keeping they put the food in their mouth and it falls right out. You walk into the room and most of whatever the meatloaf is on their shirt or whatever. And they insist on bringing these dinner trays in and bringing them like brisket and all this stuff. So you actually kind of see this happen a lot where someone's just kind of like talking to you and you can hear the ham in the back of their throat. And, I'm kind of used to seeing this, but I don't think it's something that you'd miss if it really came down to it. If someone's concerned about that, they'd see the person they're with kind of struggling, and you just see that they were eaten something. They should. It took a little bit of work.
Do kids indicate in the same way? I think this was not the way the question was asked to us, but I'm guessing this is kind of what they meant in the way that an adult might be like throwing their arms or going like grabbing their throat. Do kids indicate in the same way, traditionally speaking, if they're choking?
I don't really know. I've never, I'm not a pediatrician. When I was doing my rotations in med school, I never really saw a choking victim, and our kids, thankfully, never really choked on much. I mean, every once in a while they'd be eating a hot dog or something and their eyes would get all watered up and then they'd, kick it out. But yeah, I don't think it's not something that happens that often. And parents are so nervous about it. And I mean, if our food had to be cut up into, if our food, like if my sister would cut her kids' food, hot dogs, into like mincemeat. And if that was required, I think we would have died off a long time ago. So I think, it's something to kind of consider if someone's in trouble, but I don't think it's the
paramount Yeah, I think based on the response, and also parents in my life that I know that worry about it, I was very curious. Okay, so that's that. Robbie in Denver asked if you have ever fainted or barfed the first time you saw things when you were working on the floor, either in residency or in practice.
No, I don't remember. I've never been one of those people that gets like totally squeamish about the blood. There were people in our training who had such a bad problem they went off to being a pathologist, which means you just look at stuff after it's been removed from people.
Really?
Because the blood was such a problem they couldn't handle being on the floors, or they just had to do dermatology or something. It's just no blood. But yeah, for any time, I don't want to get everyone listening sick to their stomach, but stuff with the oropharynx just makes me sick. I can't stand it. And some of the worst are these people who had a hard time with getting off of a ventilator. They get a thing called a trach in their neck. And I'll just say that thing gets kind of nuts.
Well, I think people are probably more curious about that than you think, especially now because we keep hearing the word ventilator and people are on ventilators. So, and can you go back, whatever the fuck word you used? Can you speak to us like we don't know, Nick? Because I don't know what you've just said.
Like all that gross mucus and stuff that can cake up, that is what gets me sick to my stomach. And that that's the thing I have the hardest time with. And anyone who has like ventilator or a tube in their neck when they can't get off the ventilator that attaches to a ventilator. There's like, every morning you wake up and you got something in your head you have to cough out in the bathroom. That just sits there.
God.
And that's pretty terrible. But that and the other thing you kind of get used to is the smell of like someone having pooped in a bucket in the room and it's just sitting in there.
Oh, God.
Or you'll walk down the hallway and you'll walk past a room where it smells like someone just took an entire sewage out of a van and dumped it right into that room. And what happened then is that person had been constipated for days. And that's what success smells like.
Oh my God.
That person probably gets to leave the hospital that day.
So God. Oh, so gross. Wait, I want to, even though we're not on the COVID questions, and this isn't a question we got, but just on the trach thing, does everybody that is put on a ventilator end up with the hole in their throat?
No. If you can't get off a ventilator for like 2 weeks, usually that's around the time where you start when a tube goes in your throat, it has to have a seal around it so that air doesn't just go right around the tube and come right back out. So there's an inflatable little cushion around the tube, and that balloon kind of seals the tube right past your vocal cords. And if it's in there too long, it can start to like scar up the tissues of your trachea. So after about 2 weeks, they just say, hey, if we can't get this off, we're going to put a temporary hole in your trachea there. And it can always be removed like an earring later on.
So it isn't
with
like those. COVID. Sorry. Oh, go ahead. I'll ask in a second.
You go ahead.
Well, is it the same like those people that smoke and we see those commercials where they talk like that? And
that's it.
But then those holes remain permanent, right? So that's not like an earring, right?
Well, for some of those people, they've had cancer of the airway, upper airway. And so there's like a permanent blockage to their ability to breathe out of their mouth.
Oh,
And
okay.
so that I mean, I can't say why the people in the commercials, but it's usually something like along those lines,
It's to scare us out of smoking cigarettes, which most of us did in high school and college. So
Yeah.
what were you going to say in relation to COVID, though? You were about to say,
Oh, well, they're not, the people who get intubated end up remaining intubated for many weeks. And they're usually kind of doing terribly at the whole time. So there's not like this point where we're like, well, if it wasn't for the intubation, we'd be able to get them out of the hospital. So we're not traking those people so frequently, but at the 2 week mark or whatever.
but it's a
it's a
pretty big
little.
decision, right? Like that isn't something that's just lightly decided.
Well, what are you going to do? It's
Okay.
like 2 weeks in and they're not like coming off the vent. You've tried a few times and it's just kind of the next step toward getting them closer to the street. Only they're going to get to that street a hell of a lot slower than they would normally have.
I get it.
But
Okay.
it's like so many other things. Our bodies do all the work. When someone gets sick, most of what we do is support the body through the illness, giving the person time to recover. And recovery means their bodies themselves healing. So if you get someone who's young and robust, that recovery is going to be pretty swift. You get someone who's old and frail. I mean, their frailty decides how they're going to recover. And if they're too frail for their body to heal itself, it won't, or it will very slowly. So these are the people either the acute insult, whatever the hell it was so terrible that a robust person will take a long time to recover, or the person was so frail that they can't recover on their own, or both. These things we do to bridge people through the acute illness, like intubate someone and breathe for them, or you replace their kidneys with dialysis, or give them medicine to support their blood pressure. I mean, those things we do, they're just temporary measures we do. If their body won't recover, there's nothing that we have for that. And they eventually end up going on to hospice. There's just, their body has to do the recovering. We really don't have a lot of control still in 2020 over that. There's not a lot we do that cures people of a disease. Their body has to do that themselves.
Wow, that's really interesting. I've never heard it said like that. So just going back to your episode, Robbie had a two-part question. I don't know if Robbie is male or female, so I'm just going to say they. They asked if you have ever diagnosed someone when you were out at a dinner with your family or when you were working with something weird, or at least told them they needed to see a doctor based on what you just happened to be observing, which I thought was a super interesting question.
Yeah, I try to stay out of it. Sometimes you see things that you kind of need. So I think it was a while ago, a few years ago, I was on a plane coming back to St. Louis with my wife, Hannah, and the guy 2 rows ahead of me on the aisle seat had this ugly looking thing on the back of his neck. And, it just it's immediate recall. Boom, there it is. Like, oh, that's not good. And then I'm thinking, should I say something to this guy or not? And I tell my wife, and immediately she's all about gossip and that kind of stuff. So
Hi, Hannah. I am too.
it.
Don't let him shade you. I am the same way. Go ahead.
She loves the situation. She's like, what are you going to do? So on the way out of the plane, I kind of, when we were outside of leaving the terminal, I kind of came up to him like, hey, and I did it here on purpose. So he had a way to get away from me.
Well, that's thoughtful though.
So I'm like, that thing on your neck kind of needs to be looked at. And he's like, oh yeah, I already got someone who's working on it. I'm like, oh, good. I've had family ask me a lot of questions, and I've learned not to do that. A family member once wanted to stop smoking. And a thing that we do often is give people a medicine that is as part of it. There's a number of things that go into stopping smoking. I mean, you have to, I'm not going to get into a smoking lecture here, but one of the things we do is we try to manage the anxiety that comes with stopping nicotine, because when you withdraw from nicotine, you become more anxious. So we give a antidepressant called Wellbutrin to help manage that anxiety. And it's a short-term thing. It's like, 3 to 6 months, and just gets you through it. And then you take the medicine away. Well, this person asked me to help them, and I'm like, all right, well, you need to do a few other things, but what you also, I'll give you this prescription, and just let me know. Every time I prescribe this, I'll let you know a secret. Doctors do the same thing for everyone. Their routines are so ingrained that I don't. If I saw you 3 years ago and we talked about a thing in the office, I know exactly what I said because I say the exact same thing to everyone about the same thing.
Jesus, I don't know if that's assuaging any anxiety because we all think we're fluffy, unique butterflies, Nick. Jesus, keep going.
So, you could say, well, we didn't talk about this. I'm like, I know we did, So I know I talked about this because I talk about it with everyone. There's a possibility, although it's extremely rare. Every time you start a medicine for depression, any of these medicines that manage the chemicals in your brain, there is the chance of suicide. If that happens, stop the medicine, give me a call. It's very low risk. It hardly ever happens. These medicines are given 1 in 3 have depression in this country. So
holy shit.
Anyway, I found out a few years later, not right away, a few years later, I asked someone, how's that person doing with their smoking? Like, oh, they're still smoking. I'm like, oh, shoot, I gave this medicine. They go, oh, yeah, they're closer to this person than I am. They stopped that medicine because they were thinking about killing themselves.
Shit.
Oh, and that was my lesson. Never, ever treat family, because there's this second problem. Like, there's not, with the doctor and a patient, you're supposed to be able to tell everything that's going on without any concern. Well, there's this other component of being vulnerable and shame with your family.
Sure.
And people like hide things from you. And she was probably more concerned what I think about her if she reported that. So thank God nothing happened. But that was my lesson. I'm not going to ask, if someone asked me about their rash, I would say,
go see your doctor.
Along the lines of, I would probably see a doctor. It's always, well, if it were me, that's kind of how I frame the answer. But I don't answer questions about family anymore because of that kind of thing.
But are you still the first phone call? I mean, when I broke my arm, I found the doctor in the family and was like, do I have to go get this x-rayed? And the answer was, yeah, you do. But would you take that phone call?
Yeah, I take it. People are struggling with their situation. I'm kind of like, I've seen this road before. It's kind of like I'm kind of like the jungle guide. So what they're suggesting makes sense. Just keep up with it. Run it by me, fine. I'll tell you if it sounds reasonable. I'm not going to tell them exactly what to do. I'm going to let the person caring for them, but they can run it by me. And if the guy sounds like a quack, I'll be like, yeah, it's totally nutballs.
So you'll be the second opinion still. That's what you're saying. Okay, cool. So these were just some random questions I had been gathering from emails that we got. So I didn't credit this handful of questions. I didn't credit to anyone. Sorry, listeners. How do you handle takeout food during this time? Sorry. So now we're transitioning into COVID questions. I'm so sorry. I'm doing a great job. Can you tell I'm out of practice? I haven't interviewed in a minute. Holiday time, everybody. So sorry. COVID questions now, Dr. Nick.
Oh, COVID. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, takeout. I mean, everywhere except for that King Dough around the corner is great.
The shade. Okay, so I think what this was specifically asking was because people had asked me, you had said your family has kind of, you're going to the grocery store, you're doing things sort of that you have to feed your family. So are you personally doing takeout food with your family? Are you and your wife the kids can have it?
I think, I mean, my take, basically the way this thing is spread is from water droplets that people spit when they're talking or breathing or whatever. And if they agitate their airway enough, that becomes kind of an aerosol. Think of like Febreze, And if you're in a room that someone sprays Febreze on one side of the room, you're probably going to smell it on the other side of the room. It can linger in the air for several minutes. So that's how this is spread. There's no doubt that when someone's preparing food, they can't help themselves from breathing on it. You can go down a rabbit hole where you start to think oh my God, I'm just going to hide in a basement. It's just so one of the side effects of this is you really start to really think how gross we all are, But I don't think the food it's cooked as it's cooked. The food is whatever's in the food is killed and it's quickly packaged. I'm not much more concerned about getting sick from the food now than I was before all this. And we try to, when we do feel like doing something different and we're just sick of the same three things we cook, one of them being cereal, we're like, we'll order something from a local place and try to support these guys who are struggling.
Do you Lysol wipe the exterior of the or the takeout once you get it to your house, or are you not that extreme?
When this whole thing started in late March, none of us knew what the hell, how this thing would spread, how it behaved. We knew it was terrible. What we were, so all of us who were coming in the hospital were coming home, stripping naked in the garage, running through the house and trying to shield our kids' eyes, before we went upstairs and showered off. Had no idea. We were concerned that things on the material, on the surfaces of stuff called like fomites is the fancy word for that, would be able to pick it up, and then you touch your eye and all of a sudden you're dying. And it turns out that this is not spread I guess it could be spread that way, but it really isn't. It's not spread by contact. So if you bring stuff home from the grocery store, I don't waste any time touching it, putting it away, eating it, whatever. I'm not worried about any of that. I don't change clothes when I get home. Basically I wear a mask and make sure when I'm going into a place everyone else is, and those are basically the rules. And wash your hands.
Hello.
Yeah. When I get home, the first thing I do is wash my hands. I wash my hands a lot, but those are basically the rules. And as long as you kind of follow those two basic rules, it's fine. You can go out into the store. The thing about Christmas that is kind of tragic is that, everyone knows what the rules are. The rules are if you go into a place, you wear the mask. So what was not even on the table was going to mom's house wearing a mask.
Hello.
So people would rather just stay in their home than to get together and wear a mask. And, maybe it wasn't a good idea because people fall into old routines when they're at home. So maybe they, take the mask off, start eating some chips and dip, and pretty soon, they're whatever the heck else they're doing. But if theoretically these get-togethers could still happen if people could just put the food and drink down and talk with a mask on and not feel too weird about it. The same way they do at the grocery store.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. So one of the questions we got also was, what is reasonable since people are clearly unwilling to wear masks? And I thought that was interesting because I see it all the time. I mean, everywhere people are taking in-person meetings. I mean, I just don't. Mm-hmm. So what is it? What is reasonable since people are? I don't know what. Maybe this was meaning like, what's a reasonable response since people are not wearing masks? Or I don't. Maybe I shouldn't have asked this question.
Like what do you do when you see someone who isn't being?
There you go. All right, answer that question.
Good question. I have absolutely no idea what to do with that. I myself just try to ignore it and leave the situation. I have. There's been another wave of people coming into the hospital near the end of the fall from like the Oktoberfest season, and then in Halloween. And then there was another wave after Thanksgiving.
Really? Already we've seen that. Well, of course, I guess we've seen that.
Well, you know what it is? It's not like people. So when this first started in St. Louis, I think that the big event, that's the super spreader event, was the St. Patrick's Day stuff at the beginning of March. So 20-year-old Joe Schmo goes out to the St. Patrick's Day thing with about to 20,000 other people from his city. And they all just hang out together, doesn't give a shit about anything else. They go home, they're infected. Day 5 through 14, they're sick. They're not the ones showing up to the hospital. They're spreading it to older family. The older family, there's an incubation period, let's just say 7 days. At day 7, that older family is coming in. So it's like 14 to 21 days after the event when the people are hitting the hospitals, because it's not the individual who initially got it from the thing. It's the people they came into contact with after the thing. So, after Halloween, it was like about 3 weeks before, it was about a week before or 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. That was when a lot of plans were just canceled because everyone's like, holy crap, this is getting serious. And after the summer, where everyone kind of got a peak at normal again, whatever the hell that is, you know, people. I myself, in October, we were making plans for Thanksgiving with a few family and canceled everything, you know. And then after Thanksgiving, about a week or two before Christmas, we had another bunch of people coming to the hospital, getting intubated, that kind of stuff. I mean, so it's a very delayed response, you know. I'm trying to remember what the actual question was before I went off on some kind of random
No, that was
tangent.
great because I like the question. I should have clarified it and I didn't. I just wrote it down. I was like, all right, this came in. I went and
2
looked.
points me.
No, for sure you saved that. So I went and looked, and the episode that we recorded with you was we aired it in June. So that was like, I didn't realize it was that long. So in essentially 6 months, has your sort of perspective on it changed? Because you had said now we're seeing this sort of, another wave, and someone had asked about the second strain or whatever that a lot of people are really concerned about. So have you sort of changed your approach to it from a treatment perspective and from an expectation perspective? And then B, have you seen, or do you think you've seen the second strain of it?
You know, we are constantly rethinking how we do this. It's like we're really making this up in real time. I have never before looked at studies and development. All of us who are paying attention to this have, you know, if you are doing a study, you initially fill out grant proposals and you submit them, and then they're approved. And while your study is being like the information's being gathered, you got your study in this like limbo place, and they're listed. It's a huge list. We're all looking up these studies that are being done in real time, and like, just what questions are people asking? You know, it's like it isn't nearly as sexy or interesting as like the Apollo project in the 60s, but it is like it every day there's something interesting and new. But overall, as much attention is being paid, that all we're learning is what not to do. You know, the first time this came through, there was this concern that people would spread the infection if they were sick. So as they got really hypoxic and they came in to the hospital, to keep them from spreading it to the other care workers, and they were going into like total hypoxic respiratory failure. There's a condition where your lungs just don't work anymore called ARDS, adult respiratory distress syndrome, and everyone had it, and so we decided 1 + 1 = 2. Intubate them. You'll be able to oxygenate them better. You'll be able to protect staff better. And what we learned is that it was a terrible idea for reasons we still don't understand. People, as soon as they were intubated, crumped. They just crumped. They fell to pieces. They went into immediate shock. They had this cytokine release syndrome, where the same kind of thing, if you had a terrible allergy to something, it just fell apart, you know, started bleeding everywhere. And then they wouldn't get off the vent. Every day was like, it was crushing, because every day no improvement was made, yet another problem would happen. They'd get an irregular heart rhythm. They'd start a bleeding thing. Then they'd get a clotting problem, blood clots in the lung. You know, the shock got worse. It was week 3, and you were still seeing new problems, bacterial super infections of the lungs, you know, a new pneumonia. And ultimately, the patients I was involved with, about 80% of them died. That's kind of what the data was, if you had kidney failure in the setting of all that. Now, the second time around, as things have got picked up this fall, we're not intubating anybody unless we have to. They get the highest flow oxygen on the floor, non-invasive pressure support, all that stuff. But we're not intubating them unless it's absolutely a must, and they're recovering faster, and they're not getting as sick. And it's like, that's probably the biggest change. But there's a bunch of other stuff, like, you know, we're not trying to inject sunlight or bleach into people.
I was literally going to ask. You'll see. Keep going. That's so funny.
I mean, it just, you know, like the Plaquenil was hot for a minute. The only thing that really seems to work that we have is a steroid called Decadron, which improves the situation by about 10%. And then there's this antibody called I can't ever say it. medicine's like a Latin. It's a dead language no one can speak. It's remdesivir, and it improves your situation by like another 6 or 7%. So combined with those two, someone's starting to get short of breath, you can improve their situation by about 15%. It's what we do, but it's still paltry. We still don't have anything. The vaccines coming out, the best vaccine is the one you get. You get it as soon as you can. There is no concern about the vaccine. It's not like you're going to. Everyone approaches this question about the vaccine when people test me about it in the office. My patient's like, well, they got that vaccine, and they look at me like waiting for me to say something, or family or whatever. You're either going to get the vaccine or you're going to get the infection several times. The infection is going to not go away. There are going to be pockets of the world that aren't vaccinated, and that's where the infection will remain. And it'll just trade hemispheres every summer it'll go south, every winter it'll come north, just like influenza does. And unless you can vaccinate the entire world, there are going to be pockets that that will keep that virus alive. And so the antibodies you get from having this infection only last about 2 to 4 months, usually about 3. And they're not good. In these studies, they do the vaccine trials, your antibody load goes, trying to do this in the reverse for you. It goes up and then it's flat. Like, it's like going up the side of a table and then it's the top of a table. The antibodies are robust. And in comparison, if you look at someone who's been infected, their antibody levels, it's just this paltry, measly, slightly bumpy rise and fall. So your immunity that you have from having had the infection is still crap anyway, by comparison to the vaccines. But the vaccine, it may not last for good, but it lasts as long as we've been testing it. The antibody levels have not yet started to fall in any of the test subjects. So it's much longer than having gotten, and if there are probably going to be boosters that you need to take, and like the influenza vaccine you get every year probably. But you don't get to choose either get the vaccine, get the infection, or neither. It's like you will get infected. Your number is going to come up soon enough. So I know that the consequences of getting infected are terrible. And I'm not talking about the death rate. I mean, a third of people who get this have a serious infection. They're out for 2 weeks. They have to cancel work and they have permanent damage, respiratory stuff. It could be the new asbestos. People still have memory problems months after they have this thing. So, it's going to be another risk factor like diabetes, I think, in the mix for organ disease. The side effects of the vaccine aren't your problem. So everyone's testing me out like, well, shoot, is this vaccine something we need to get? Yes, get the damn vaccine. What about the side effects? What side effects? Get the damn vaccine. You know what the side effects are if you don't get the vaccine. You're going to get sick. You're going to have at least 2 weeks out of work. You may not even be sick, but you have a 1 in 3 chance you will be. You probably spread it to someone you love. Just get the goddamn thing.
Is there a difference between the two? Because you previously said the best vaccine is just the one you get. So did that mean it doesn't matter if it's Pfizer or if it's, I forget the other company, just get it?
No, they're all great.
They're all great.
They're all over. I mean, we were hoping for a vaccine that might reduce your risk by 50%. These are all like well over 90%.
Wow.
I mean, just hit it out of the park, these vaccine companies.
But I would say one of the things that's making me nervous is how quickly it came out, because normally vaccines are, years in trial. So what makes you feel like, who cares? Like that you feel confident that it's still okay, even though it came out quickly?
It's tough because it's a good question. I've had a front row seat to a lot of terrible this past year. All of us have a level of understanding that we can't trust our leadership and the organizations fully. We have to be careful. I think that's not news. That's since the Vietnam era and Nixon, right?
Sure.
But so there's going to be, and now everyone's hyper. What confidence in the government is like 20%.
I mean, if that,
and for decent reasons,
sure.
Not because they're crazy, but because they've observed great terribleness that have led them to that. So, it's a good question. Can we trust the FDA that approved these things? I I feel so. I feel that you can. Some thoughts I have about this. I have friends who have done the research for Pfizer. They were one of the test sites. They were involved in the science at some level. Nothing they saw raised alarm bells. The process is still based in the scientific method, which is the best, only way to answer a question, where you're not using your emotions, you're using, very sound reasoning. And so a large problem with the FDA and how it gets its stuff done is all of the paperwork and there might have been some expectations for a new vaccine that were born out of fear of getting sued or the people having any consequences. So they had to follow people for years before they were able to. Was that necessary? Probably not. And I just fall back to, there's a way of reasoning things out that I find very helpful from the Jesuits, where you don't make decisions in based only on principles in isolation. You have to make real decisions in real time in this life with the situation you're given. So you'd use analogy. And here we have a situation where you have a terrible infection and you have the alternative, which is getting inoculated with a new vaccine. The consequences of that vaccine for the population are going to be far, far less than the consequences of people getting infected several times over from the virus. There will be people who get side effects of this vaccine. We can't predict who they will be. We can't predict what they will be. There might be someone who gets Guillain-Barré, which is an ascending paralysis you see sometimes with vaccines. There might be people who get horns that grow out of their head. Who knows?
That's helpful, Nick.
You just can't know. But all I know is that this virus is terrible. And so I'm recommending to every patient I see that they get this vaccine. And you can't say, well, I need to have perfect knowledge that I'm not going to get harmed by this vaccine. That doesn't exist. It won't exist. It's never going to exist. You got to make decisions in real time. And by comparison, this is a far better option. So
that's a great answer. Okay, so just going back up to a different question, how do you feel about the states that have, some are now closing? When this question was posed, it was a couple months ago when like all states were opening bars and sort of going back to normal service. Since then, now especially things have been mandatorily shut down. But how did you feel when states were going back to normal operations?
Yeah, all I can think about is there was, I mentioned I have a front row seat to a lot, this whole thing. And one of the things I've observed that has been interesting, you see that our sense-making organs, the media, is more about entertainment than being informative. They ignored this problem until it was on our doorstep, and then they sensationalized it. And our politicians, which are supposed to be, they're sworn to protect us. That's one of the most important things they do. They're more interested in protecting the ruling class than they are in taking care of people, maintaining. There has been zero leadership throughout this whole thing. And so everyone has had to decide what they're going to do for themselves. Their businesses have had to decide, am I going to stay open or am I going to stay closed? I remember, in St. Louis here, it's a pretty Catholic city. The archdiocese had to decide whether they were going to be open for Easter Mass. And they were able to go so far as to say, you don't have to come for Easter. It was a sigh of relief when the city of St. Louis and the county decided to have a close everything policy back in April, because people didn't want to make those decisions, If they're stuck, am I going to feed the families that I pay a salary to at my restaurant or close out of some principle? And by the way, not know how to, feed myself. You're not going to close. It doesn't make any sense. Why would people make these decisions? All of us consider the greater good in our daily little selfish decisions we make. But, there's still going to be at some level selfish. You got leadership as the only person in the room that's going to say, for the greater good only, we're going to make this decision. And, there's plenty of people out there who have these, well, what are we, fascists, fascists and close everything, communism, blah, blah, blah. I'm not worried about that because, again, the thing in our face is this virus. We can worry about if martial law is going to happen tomorrow. Right now, today, we want to not have everybody sick. And so, especially back in April. So, we in St. Louis right now have some counties are fully open, and the St. Louis County itself is closed, but the city is open. There's no leadership. Each individual municipality has almost had to make their own decision on what they're going to do, and they don't have all the science, and they're more parochial, so they have to bend to the knee of what everyone screaming at them says. They're not going to be so worried about the greater good. And so, whenever I see that like Jefferson County just had an outbreak and their hospital's swamped and they may not have enough events back in September, October, or, now it's St. Charles, I just think I get more angry about the lack of leadership we've had in this country that should have marshaled in some kind of a mask rule and, limitations to our what we do. And I'm all about opening things back up, but you have to be measured about that. It's not all or nothing. Like everything else that any other real conversation you're going to have, there's nuance. And at a national level, unfortunately, people aren't able to use the brain God gave them to think. They have to use tribalism and black and white thinking. People are either good or evil. They're not capable of being uncomfortable for a second when having a difficult conversation. They have to discharge their discomfort in some kind of a rage or screaming. I mean, if this is way more information you wanted for your question, but when I see that a certain county is open, I just think, where's the fucking leadership? If I were to put money on it, which this isn't, I would say that enough people will be vaccinated that restaurants and that can be opened as soon as April or May.
You think?
And probably by June, because, again, what you're trying to do is making sure that there's going to be a political answer here. It's not going to be, how do we protect 100% of people? It's how do we maintain our resources? And once enough people will be vaccinated, the resources will be available to open up where you have enough ICU beds.
Is that the marker? Is that why things are, it's a
large part of it.
Okay.
It's been a real civics lesson for me this year, how decisions are made at that level. I mean, the CDC and the WHO, I'm so angry at them. And everyone looks at Fauci compared to Trump, but Fauci is a political animal too. He came out and said masks, it's black and white. Masks are helpful. They work. But initially, so many of these organizations were saying no masks. No masks. Why? Because they wanted to protect their resources and they didn't want everyone and their mother going out and buying up masks. So they, instead of telling us the adult thing, which would have been, hey, guys, we are not quite ready for this thing. And although masks work really well, we're going to ask you to hang back and not buy a bunch of them right away so we have enough time to stock the hospital centers and that. Can you please be a dear and just be cool? I think that people would have responded well to that.
Yeah.
But instead of trusting the people that elected them, they'd say, we're going to outright lie to them.
Yeah, that's what it felt like.
That's what it was. And,
Jesus.
I had hospital administrators. I wrote email to, I am going to wear a mask. You all should wear a mask too. And they said, well, actually, if you do wear a mask, your credentials are going to be threatened. So
you mentioned that on your episode, like the previous episode, and I was like, how is it's insane.
It's politics.
Yeah.
And, it's
the politics
nuts.
of people's lives. It is nuts. It is nuts.
So they're going to open back up because it's good for business when they're confident they'll be able to accommodate the consequences of it. And so that'll be.
But do you think for those of us that are going to have to go back to work, not in the same way you are, but like those of us in customer service, do you think vaccine, mask, and then we should feel pretty confident that we're going to be okay?
Yeah. I mean, masks at a place where people are eating. Get a little bit sketchy. But everyone will they're going to be looking for people by May and June to give vaccines to. I'm pretty, unless I'm hearing complete misinformation on how many vaccines are being made. All the essential people will have them through January. By February, they'll be giving them to high-risk individuals, nursing home, dialysis patients. By February, March, they'll open them up to anyone over 65 with at least one illness, pre-existing condition, whatever. They'll have the rest of that population probably by April and be opening it up to the general public, I would bet by May or June. And by that time, then you can guarantee, at least in the cities, people will be relatively safe. And so then you can, and by then things will have calmed down, and the hospitals will be back to normal like they were in, July and August.
Well, and then it'll be summertime, and that seems to assuage some of the,
Right.
Oh, that's crazy to think about.
So, that's kind of how I think it'll end up playing out. They're going to, and each county is going to have its own decision to when to do that. Like Comedy Store could open up in Jefferson County today.
Oh, shut the fuck. Oh, yeah, because they just don't get. Well, there's comics I know that are currently on tour. And I'm like, a bunch of comics have moved to Texas because they can openly perform there.
Have you thought about that? Just moving the Comedy Store on the road and go to all the worst places?
Other comedy clubs are open. Other comedy clubs have fully shut down, meaning like they will not reopen after the pandemic, and new ones will come, and that's sort of the way it is. But yeah, this has gone far longer than I think any of us, maybe not you, but any of us that knew nothing. We were like, oh, by May or June, of course we're going to be back up and running. And it's like, no, we're looking down the barrel of another year. But
it's bad politics to talk like that.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate, because I think if everyone knew what they were up against, like when this was in Italy and about to hit our shores hardcore in March, it was clear this was going to be a year and a half to most people like me,
Sure.
But most people don't have those expectations. So they're routinely upset or disappointed. Our government spending isn't where it needs to be because they're not preparing for that kind of a thing. They're preparing for a quarterly problem, not a annual problem.
Sure. Well, at least, I feel more hopeful with the vaccine and mask thing that you addressed. So yeah, I'm really grateful that you talked about it. And thank you for giving me this much time. I'm so grateful. You're a very busy human. And, but a lot of people listened to your episode and really liked it. So you should feel good. You're making a difference.
Well, yeah. Everyone was asking.
Everyone, Dr. Nick, everyone. I just like that can piss you off so much. I'm only referring to you as a doctor.
It's a slow Sunday, so I have.
Oh, fuck off! You wanted to do this. Fuck you.
Just adjust. You guys are just shut down.
Mm-hmm. At least I'm not working on the front lines like your stupid ass, like trying to save lives. At least I'm just trying to serve burgers and beer. Like you got into it. You're too committed.
Some might call that the front lines. Burgers and beer.
I don't know.
That's where everyone's catching it.
Jesus Christ. Okay, right. Nick, thank you so much. Please tell your family I said hello.
I will. Talk to you.
Talk to you soon. This podcast episode is dedicated in loving memory to Jeff Scott. We love you. We will miss you always. And we hope you're up there playing a little tune to intro the comics that have gotten there before all of us.